lifetime of the disciples. We're at 16,000. There were wars and rumors of war in the lifetime of the disciples. The disciples lived in a time period called the Roman peace. The Roman peace was a time when the Roman Empire had so much control, nobody wanted to go to war with them. So when Jesus is telling the disciples there's going to be wars and rumors of war, that would have been very unique to the disciples. The disciples lived in peacetime. And guess what? 40 years after Jesus said that, that's when the Jewish-Roman wars broke out in the first century. Josephus writes about it in the War of the Jews. There were wars and rumors of war in the lifetime of the disciples. Jesus said, they will bring you before kings and queens, and you'll have to give an account for me. Who in 2023 is being brought before a king so they can give an account for Jesus? If you are in disagreement with what I'm telling you, I want you to put in the chat, who in 2023 is being brought before a king? Who in 2023 is being brought before a king or a queen on behalf of Jesus? Nobody. Because that happened to the disciples. That specifically happened to Paul. You need to go no further than the book of Acts. Paul literally had to go before King Agrippa so that he could give an account for Jesus. Jesus said, they will bring you in their synagogues and they will kill you. Who in 2023 is being brought into a synagogue and being killed on behalf of Jesus? That's not happening to anybody today, but that did happen to the disciples. That happened to Jesus' brother James. James was literally beat to death in a synagogue. For those of you who don't know church history, the Apostle James was murdered or martyred in a synagogue. This stuff happened to the disciples. The last days was about the disciples. And it was the last days because they were waiting for the Jewish temple to fall, like Jesus prophesied 40 years prior. So that is what this is about. This is not about today. This is not about 2023. This is not about 2022, right? To anybody who thinks I'm misleading people, come up on stage, right? Revelation is not about you. Revelation is about the first century church. We have been programmed to not think. We have been programmed when we open up our Bible, we think these people are talking about us. They were not. They are not. These people are not talking to you today. These people are talking to their audience, right? So we got to understand that. We got to understand that, right? We got to understand that. These people were talking about their audience. You're wrong, blah, 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 blah. To anybody who disagrees, you can come up on stage. You can talk to me. I'm not going to scare you away. Y'all, let's get to 20,000 likes. The last days was about the last days of the old covenant. You literally can read this in Genesis chapter 34. In Genesis chapter 34, Jacob is about to die. Because I don't know if you know, the last days is not a new idea. The last days is an Old Testament idea. The last days is not something that Jesus just made up. The last days is an old idea. By the way, most of the time when Jesus is talking about the last days, he's pulling from the book of Zechariah. Zechariah 12, Zechariah 13, Zechariah 14. I don't know if Christians know this or not. Jesus isn't just like, let me make this up on a Tuesday. Jesus is pulling this out of the Old Testament, right? We're just going to do like this because Christian people are just delayed in the head or something like that. Christian people are just touched. The last days in the Bible is about the last days of Israel's covenant. Thank you for the socks. Israel's days were numbered because Israel killed the Messiah. You understand? So as a result of Israel killing the Messiah, Israel's days were numbered. That's why Zechariah 14 says, they shall look upon me who they have pierced. That is not a New Testament verse. That is a prophecy about the day of the Lord in Zechariah chapter 14. So I'll turn the comments back on. There we go. So the last days were about the last days of Israel. The sign that the last days were over was the Jewish temple falling to the ground. When the Jewish temple fell in 70 AD, that was the sign that the age of Moses was finally over. When the Jewish temple fell in 70 AD, that was the final sign that the last days were over. So, honestly, this is why I'm just paying attention for the signs. There are no signs of the last days today. So, the Jewish temple had to fall, right? The Jewish temple had to fall. Because in Jesus' day, here was the issue. The issue in Jesus' day was this, right? Because we got a lot of comments from a lot of people in the chat. We're going to do like that. In Jesus' day, the issue was the Jews had the physical temple. The Jews would go to the physical temple. Inside of the temple, you would have a priest. The priest would make sacrifices, and the priest would make atonement for the people, right? Jesus came onto the scene, and Jesus talks about his kingdom, his temple. But you can't have a physical Jewish temple and a spiritual Jewish temple standing at the same time. Jesus came to bring a spiritual temple, but the Jews already had a physical temple. The Jews already had a physical priesthood. The Jews already had a physical temple. So the issue was in Jesus' day, you can't have two temple systems standing at the same time. One of them has to go. So in 70 AD, that would have been 40 years after Matthew chapter 24. In 70 AD, the Romans sieged Jerusalem. They killed the Jews. They cornered the Jews into the Jewish temple. That is why the book of Revelation says, in that day, people will seek death and they won't find it. Why? Well, the reason why people sought death on that day was because the Romans cornered the Jews inside of the Jewish temple. The Jewish temple is surrounded by mountains. That is why Revelation says, and they will say, mountains, please fall on us. That has nothing to do with today. That has everything to do with what happened in 70 AD. The Jews were cornered by the Romans. They retreated into the temple. They wanted to die. The Jews wanted to die. But Jews don't believe in suicide. So because Jews don't believe in suicide, as they were surrounded by the Romans, as the temple was surrounded, they cried out to the mountains to fall on them before the Romans got to them. The Romans did get to them and they died. The Jewish temple was burned down to the ground, and the smoke from the Jewish temple was so thick, it blocked out the sun. That is why Jesus says, in that day, the sun won't give his light. It's not that the sun blew up. The reason why the sun didn't give his light is because the sun was blocked from the smoke from the temple. Y'all, this is not rocket science. We have made the Bible so magical, we have completely missed its historical context. We have made the Bible so magical and so fantastical, you don't need to go any further than the historical records we already have. So, in 70 AD, the Jewish temple fell, and that was the commemoration of the end of the age. What Jesus was waiting for the disciples to do or what the disciples were waiting for Jesus to do. When the physical Jewish temple fell, that is when God's temple, Jesus' temple, was going to tabernacle inside of men. The physical temple had to go so that the spiritual temple could dwell inside of men. And when the physical temple fell, that is when the spiritual temple came to dwell into the heart of men. And when the spiritual temple came into men, that is when Jesus came. Because Jesus' second coming was never about Jesus coming as an individual. Jesus' second coming was about his kingdom. But his kingdom was a kingdom that was not of this world. It was a kingdom that cannot be seen. So when the Jewish temple fell, that is when the spiritual temple came to dwell inside of the people. That is when the people, the church, became indwelt with the Spirit, so we now can worship God in spirit and in truth. Nobody today is going to a Jewish temple. Nobody today is going to a Temple Mount, because now the same Spirit that was inside of the temple, the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, now we have the privilege of having that same Spirit inside of us. That is why the Jewish temple had to fall. Now we are in the new heaven. Now we are in the new earth. The new heaven and the new earth are the people. We are the new heaven and the new earth. The old heaven and the old earth was the Jewish temple. Now the new temple is the body of believers. So now we as a body, as a collective, we as a group, we are the new heaven and we are the new earth. Revelation is finished. Revelation has been fulfilled. Jesus has done everything that he promised he would do. The reason why the world doesn't look like heaven on earth is because you guys are waiting for Jesus to do something that he has already done. Jesus has given you everything that you need. And if the world doesn't look how you want it to look, it's your job as the church to change that, because now you are the new heaven and new earth. If the world doesn't look like a wonderland, it's your fault. You are the new heaven and you are the new earth. If you don't want people out here hungry and scared and depressed, you do something about it. When Jesus fed the multitudes of people, the disciples came up to Jesus and they said, "Master, these people are hungry." And what did Jesus say to his disciples? You feed them. I'm going to say the same thing Jesus said to his disciples. You do something about it. If you are not happy with the world in the state that it is, as the church, it's your fault. You have been waiting for Jesus to come back and do something that he has already done. But the issue is, we don't believe him. Jesus never came to bring a physical kingdom. Jesus came to bring a spiritual kingdom. Jesus did away with the physical kingdom just so we can have the spiritual temple in us wherever we go. Jesus did everything he said he was going to do. We have misinterpreted what he said. We have put expectations on Jesus that he never put. But the reason why the world isn't the way it is because of you. Christians, it's your fault. How many times have people told you, Jesus is coming? I don't need to pay my mortgage because Jesus is coming. I don't need to feed people because Jesus is coming. I don't need to worry about world peace because Jesus is coming. And when Jesus comes, Jesus is going to fix that. I'm sorry. Jesus already came. Jesus did exactly what he said he was going to do. But you just don't, well, us today, we don't understand what he did. We don't believe what he did. And we have been waiting for something physical, just like the Jews. If you are not happy with the world in the state that the world is, it's your fault. It's your fault. It's not Jesus' fault. It's you. Jesus came exactly the way he said. And thank you to the person who just got my book. If you want to learn more about this, if your pastor hasn't talked about this, if your grandmama hasn't talked about this, if this is your first time hearing about something like this, right? Go to the link in my bio and get my book. If you want to support me, go to the link in my bio and get my book. If you want to learn more about this, go to the link in my bio and get my book, right? If you want to know what your Bible actually means from the cultural context, go to the link in my bio and get my book. You can also become a member of my site where I give talks better than this. I'm having a private talk tomorrow on the Jewish Trinity. Go to the link in my bio and get my book. I will never read your book. That's probably because you can't read. So, y'all, if we don't understand the cultural context of our New Testament, so you'll notice, right? There's going to be an influx of people who are going to come in and they're going to be like, he's wrong. Those are people who are brand new to the stream. Then you're going to see people who have stayed during the entire stream and they're going to say, this makes sense. For people who have stayed for the entire stream, this will make sense. To the people who have not stayed for the entire stream, that is the perfect example of context, right? That is the perfect example of the reason why new people coming in, they're saying this doesn't make sense, is because they don't have the context from the beginning, which I'm getting tired of talking about. Y'all, let's get to 25,000 likes. Tap that screen, tap that screen, tap that screen. So